Picture the stark, white, neoclassical columns of the Executive Mansion. You've got the manicured green grass and all that historical weight of a space designed over centuries to project diplomacy and democratic order.
And then you shatter that image with something completely jarring.
Completely jarring. You overlay that diplomatic space with the metallic grid of an eight-sided fighting cage, surrounded by blinding stadium lights. That is the surreal visual we were presented with exactly 1 week ago on June 14, 2026, when President Trump hosted a premier mixed martial arts spectacle directly on the White House lawn.
It really was a collision of two entirely different civic languages, wasn't it? The architecture of the White House communicates restraint and law, but then you place a cage designed for physical combat right at its center.
And as we gather for our Sunday reflection today, on June 21st, 2026, we're looking at this event strictly as a moral and spiritual image. I mean, we're not here to debate the athletic merits or give a sports recap.
No, not at all. When a nation turns its public house into an arena for violence, the Christian question really can't just be whether the broadcast was entertaining. The core inquiry is, what is this doing to our souls?
Before we really get into that spiritual cost, we do need to be clear with the human element here. The sports commentary we reviewed makes a vital point. The athletes stepping inside that cage are not mindless brawlers.
That's a crucial distinction. We are talking about human beings made in the image of God. They possess an inherent dignity, dedicating thousands of hours to a really demanding craft. The fighters are not the villains in this scenario.
Right, the tension here isn't about demonizing the people taking the hits. It's about the broader societal framework. Okay, let's unpack this because the historical context is wild. If you look at the cultural trajectory of mixed martial arts going back maybe 30 years, it was pushed to the extreme margins of society.
Lawmakers are famously calling it human cockfighting. It carried a heavy social stigma.
It did. And while we shouldn't overclaim that it was completely banned from all television formats forever, polite society definitely deemed the violence entirely taboo. It was relegated to fringe programming. And now, fast forward to 2026, that exact same mechanic of physical combat is being hosted on the front lawn of the highest office in the land.
Which brings up the concept of the modern gladiator. Now, the historians in our sources aren't suggesting we are literally back in the Colosseum, but they dissect how the staging mirrors ancient methods of audience manipulation.
So pairing the visceral reality of physical violence with patriotic imagery. The flags, the national anthems, the ultimate seal of state authority.
What's fascinating here is how that specific packaging changes the psychology of the viewer. When you wrap combat in the veneer of premium national entertainment, it bypasses our normal empathetic filters. It subtly catechizes the public into admiring domination and brute force as a form of civic strength.
And before we move into what that does to our spiritual lives, I do want to mention, for those of you who rely on these morally serious Sunday reflections to help navigate the intersection of culture and faith, subscribing to Claire and Horatio helps ensure we can keep bringing you these uninterrupted reviews of our changing world.
Because the world is changing rapidly, when the state places a moral seal of approval on violence, teaching citizens that power is best expressed by physically conquering someone in the shadow of the Oval Office, that creates a massive clash with the Christian worldview.
A direct clash, especially when you look at today's liturgical context. Today is the 12th Sunday in Ordinary Time, and the teachings from Jesus in today's gospel are incredibly explicit. In the words of Matthew, Jesus warns his followers to fear no one, and specifically says, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul."
The theological commentaries we are looking at lean heavily on that exact distinction. The early disciples faced literal physical martyrdom, but modern theologians apply this warning to the quiet, creeping influences that distort our moral compass without ever laying a finger on us.
But let me push back on that, or at least play devil's advocate, based on the media analysts in our stack. So what does this all mean for us today? Sitting on our couches watching a broadcast, how does a spectacle of physical violence actually threaten the soul of the spectator if they're just passively watching a regulated athletic contest?
Well, the early church fathers actually addressed this psychological defense when they critiqued the Roman games. Theologians like Augustine argued that the amphitheater damaged the audience because of the slow, quiet numbing of empathy.
Meaning the danger to the soul isn't physical destruction, but the erosion of how we value human life.
Precisely. Neurologically and spiritually, when you repeatedly consume the physical submission or bleeding of another human being as a manufactured product, your threshold for empathy rises. The lights, the commentary, the state prestige, they all distance the viewer from the raw humanity of the fighters. Over time, that repeated exposure calluses the soul.
You lose the ability to see the divine spark in the person inside the cage, which is such a stark contrast to the tender imagery Jesus uses later in that exact same gospel reading. He talks about the sparrows, right?
That not a single sparrow falls to the ground without the Father's knowledge.
And that human beings are worth more than many sparrows. It's this beautiful, intimate valuation the Creator places on every single human life. The spiritual danger seems to happen when we trade God's valuation for the spectacle's valuation, where a human is just a prop for projecting dominance.
And if we think the adults are immune to this, the developmental psychology sources we reviewed add an incredibly sobering layer. They focus on how the most vulnerable members of society process these symbols of authority.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about a child watching this. What exactly is a child learning when public power, literally the highest office in the land, celebrates violence as premium entertainment?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those children are being catechized by the culture. A child sees the White House, a place they are taught to revere as the center of democracy, used as the backdrop for a cage fight. The visual completely overrides any nuanced adult arguments about athletic regulation.
Because they learn through modeling. It teaches the next generation to equate leadership and power with physical domination, rather than, say, diplomacy, service, or moral virtue.
It borders on an idolatry of power. Idolatry isn't just ancient golden calves. It happens when a society elevates something created, like physical strength or national dominance, to the position of ultimate importance.
Which is fundamentally opposed to the Christian narrative, where God is one who washes feet and accepts suffering rather than inflicting it. Reading through all these critiques of our modern cultural amphitheater, it could easily leave you feeling cynical, honestly, like we're just trapped in this audience.
But the spiritual commentaries actively push against that despair. They emphasize that the Christian tradition never stops at a critique of the darkness. We are not called to be passive spectators of cruelty.
We are called to be active witnesses. And the mechanics of a witness operate in total opposition to a spectator. A spectator sits in the dark and absorbs the conditioning. A witness stands in the light and testifies to human dignity.
Guarding the soul requires that active resistance. It's about redefining strength entirely.
It really is. Witnessing to courage without brutality, strength without domination, and standing for truth without fear. Empathy is the active resistance against the amphitheater.
Recognizing the inherent dignity of every person you encounter, seeing them as the sparrows cherished by the Father, dismantles the power of the spectacle.
As you step out of this Sunday reflection, we want to leave you with a lingering, morally serious question to ponder. In a culture that increasingly leverages the highest offices to celebrate the flashy spectacle of domination, how might you practice small, quiet acts of compassion and respect for human dignity in your own life this week? How will you personally and spiritually resist the amphitheater?